I first met Josh when he was that new guy in Saturday Night Worship over a dozen years ago. Didn't take me long to size him up. He always had a story to tell. They were pretty outrageous. You could tell right away it couldn't all be true. Embellished just a little bit. But then I started appearing in some of those stories, and I found out they were more true than false. And that started a journey that Josh and I have taken together for over a dozen years, and it's been a rich journey. People have said to me at times, well, you and Josh are, you're great friends. Of course you would be connected. And I said, yeah, we are great friends, but I have other great friends that I'm very connected to, and I know Josh would say the same thing. He has other great friends that he's connected to. But those great friendships did not happen by accident. And that's a big part of the story that Josh is going to share with us. They don't happen by accident. So I'm going to let Josh do the rest of the speaking. I would encourage you to listen and listen well, because he's got a powerful story to share with us. So.
Great. Thanks, Jimmy. You guys will be very happy to know I actually wrote down what I'm going to say. Because you guys know I have that unique gift to take a 45-second statement about a hairball and make it a 45-minute story. But hopefully that won't happen today. So I'll apologize ahead of time if I do more reading than just talking. I don't know if it's turning 50 this year or the chemo, but my memory's not what it used to be. But, as Jimmy mentioned, my story that I want to share is about kind of the inner circle of guys that I'm dependent on. And they're great guys, and I'll mention a few of them. But it's not so much about the guys. It's about, how they came about to be a part of my life, and the ways that I use them, and the ways that I'm dependent on them. And I'm going to reference Gordon MacDonald's book, Resilient Life, a lot. That's a great book for me. It's kind of my field manual that I use a lot. And I don't know if it's such a great book as much as it is. I like the concept of a resilient life. Because all of us, you guys know about my challenge right now, but every one of us have challenges in life. We all go through crisis, whether it's with relationships, with our spouses, or with our kids, or illness, or work-related. Everybody's got a challenge in life at some point in their life. And when that challenge comes, when that crisis is there, that's really where you need a group of guys that you can rely on to help get you through it. And I'm a firm believer that it's not impossible to develop those relationships when you're in the middle of the crisis, but it's a lot easier to have those relationships in place before that crisis hits. And we also have to be very cognizant of the fact that it's not always about me. That there's points and times where we have to be there for other people. So sometimes you're the giver and sometimes you're the recipient. But the point is you got to have these relationships in place before that crisis hits, for it to work both ways. So really what I want to do is just kind of share my experiences of how I ended up where I'm at. And it's really, when Jimmy asked me to speak, it forced me to do some reflection. Because it's not like I had a strategic plan and formed an advisement committee that meets every month. It's nothing like that. I was intentional in forming some relationships throughout my life, but I didn't really understand why those relationships, or I didn't really realize the significance of those relationships until later in life. I think God knew, I think He knew His plan. And so it's real easy for a lot of us to think that, I'm really busy at work, I'm really busy with my family, everything's going good, I don't, just don't have time. But, I think I'm a good example of you never know what life is going to hit you with. And so it's worth making investments in the relationships before you need them. And it's kind of ironic, too, because, a lot of the advice, it's not that much different than the advice we give our kids, right? We always tell our kids to really try to avoid the wrong crowd when they're young and pick friends that are good and don't pick the bad friends. And I think when we get older in life, I'm not as old as Sandy, but, it's not so much as picking the wrong people, but making sure that you have those few right people. Because there's 1,000 good people in the middle. And that's really what I want to talk about. And so the need to have a few guys in your life that you can really rely on for support and accountability is pretty easy to comprehend. I think we all can understand that. But it's really, really hard to do. When that point of crisis comes and you really need that person, if you don't have those relationships already in place, it's hard. I'm coaching a lot of people going through cancer right now, and a lot of them just don't have relationships in place. And I feel horrible for them because we're in the midst of that pain and that agony that they're going through. It's not like there's a lot of people that want to just gravitate to that scenario. People will gravitate to those scenarios when that relationship's already there. But MacDonald explained all this perfectly when he said, building a company of a happy few. He calls it a happy few, and I love that term. Although I have few is a big, broad definition for me. I have a lot of people in my few. He said, building a company of a happy few will probably not be attractive to somebody who's resistant to being challenged about the way he lives, or the way he thinks, or the way he walks with God. Allowing a few friendships to grow, and you will begin to hear some rebukes, some corrections, some warnings, and it's much easier to render opinions and judgments, and it's really much harder to listen. And I love that quote. And not only does it outline the expectations of us as individuals on what to expect when we're in a company of a happy few, but to me it's a good measuring stick about the quality of relationships you have already. Because I think all of us have a group of really good, close friends in our lives. But, if you've never been rebuked, if they never challenged the way you live, if they never challenged your walk with God, then either you're perfect, Christ was, we're not, or you simply haven't allowed that relationship to grow deep enough for those kind of conversations to open up. Or you're just too hard-headed to listen, which I'm plenty guilty of that in my life. So this happy few is, an inner circle of not just close guys that I've experienced life with, but I depend on, truly depend on. They have a true and tangible impact on the person I am. They shape my character, they influence my character, I'm really flattered when people tell me that, Josh, we're really inspired by the way you're handling your cancer journey. But that inspiration comes from you all. It comes from the people I'm around. It comes from my God. It's not something I just muster up by myself. And so these kind of relationships hopefully make me a better person. I know they've made me a better person. And it's just a little bit deeper than just a good guy to go have a beer with. So in the last chapter of this book, A Resilient Life, MacDonald identified 8 main roles that this inner circle of a happy few play in your life. And I could agree with this more. So they're the 8 roles that he outlines, and they're in no particular order. One is as a coach. You got to have somebody who you can rely upon as a coach in your life. Somebody that will stretch your mind. Somebody that listens and encourages your dreams. Somebody that protects you. Physical protection, like you saw in the movie clip, would come in handy. I'd get my ass kicked. So physical protection would be good for me. But it's really about protecting your character. Because there'll be moments in your life where your character will be tested. And you need somebody that'll speak on your behalf when you're not there. Certainly somebody that will share your tears. Somebody that plays with you, shares your fun times in your company. And as I mentioned, absolutely rebukes you when necessary to hold you accountable and keep you honest. But the most important is somebody that will seek God with you through prayer, through worship, through service. And that's absolutely the most important. And what distinguishes this group from being an impactful happy few from a good guy to go drink beer with. So let me kind of jump into my story. And I'm going to pick it up in the mid-90s when I was living up in Dallas and working for a really small Silicon Valley software-based company. And work was exciting. We're really, really busy. We were working really hard. Things were going great. It was the pre-internet days, and it was just crazy, crazy work environments in the technology world. And I was a new father, right? Sarah was born in '95. I'd been going to church for a while, but I was really early in my faith journey. I was really just kind of going through the motions at church. I was going to avoid the fight with Nancy and just, wasn't really engaged, didn't really have that relationship with Christ like I have today. But I had a seed, and that's important. And I had an inner circle of guys I was running around with, and I'm still friends with these guys today, and they're good guys. But at that time in our lives, we were all working together and working really, really hard, making a great income for our families. And it was really stressful work. And it wasn't unusual at all for us to end the week by getting all of our stuff done and going out to the golf course and having some crazy, goofy times on the golf course and plenty of refreshments. And then we'd cap that off by going to watch the Mavericks or the Stars or the Rangers. Some of the guys had season tickets to those teams, and we did that. And then we'd cap that off by going to a bar and drinking some more beers and playing some darts. Sometimes we ended up at bars we should have been at, And at the time, I kind of blew it all off as pretty innocent and normal. Because there was a lot of guys. It wasn't just me. It was pretty normal for a lot of the working guys to be going through that in our age group and stuff. And, I justified it by, it's the way I dealt with stress. It's the way you blew off steam. And so we were working really hard, playing really hard, and it was a pretty crazy time. Then, about the same time period, I met a guy named Robert Bio. So I was living in Dallas at the time, and Robert was a partner at Arthur Andersen Business Consulting here in Houston. And he was wanting to set up a practice for the technology that I was a part of in Dallas. So I got to know Robert through work. And one of the things I noticed about Robert was we always invited him to go play golf or do something with us, and he really had no part of it. And one day he kind of said, he goes, I like golf, but golf really takes me away from my family. He goes, because work does enough of that already, so I don't need to add to it. And I thought, well, that's respectful. He had a daughter a little older than Sarah and a son a little younger than Sarah. And then I started knowing Robert better and better through just work. And then one night, Robert was in Dallas, and he goes, hey, I'm staying the night. You got time for dinner? Because we can go over some meetings tomorrow that we're having, and prep, and blah, blah, blah. And I told him, I said, look, I'd love to, but my wife and I are going to a Jimmy Buffett concert. Man, his eyes got really big. He looked like a puppy dog. His tongue dropped. Turns out he's a huge Jimmy Buffett fan. And then I told him I had an extra ticket, and he started slobbering and got real excited. And he shows up at the house wearing Bermuda shorts and parrot head, and spent all afternoon buying stuff for this concert. And my wife was furious when I told her I invited a partner from Arthur Anderson to come to the Jimmy Buffett concert. She's like, don't drag work into our lives, But that kind of kicked off a relationship where he got to know my family, and I eventually got to know his family really well. And the more I was around Robert, the more he gently rebuked some things that I was doing in life. And sometimes not so gently. But one of the things I noticed about Robert was you couldn't talk to Robert without talking about God. To him, his relationship with Christ was so interwoven that it was impossible to separate. He was a devout Catholic, grew up in Catholic schools. He was on the board of the boys' Catholic school across from St. Agnes. His kids were in Catholic parochial schools. He was a Notre Dame grad, a Notre Dame season ticket holder, And to him, talking about God at work, talking about God and his relationship with Christ was just natural. And it was accepted. Nobody was ever offended by it. He wasn't preaching. He just couldn't help. You ask him how his weekend was, it was always something around his church or a small group or something. And he really, it didn't take long for me to realize that, I got a lot to learn from Robert. And he really made me reflect on my own life. He made me realize that my time could probably be better spent in different areas than I was spending it. I love golf. I love the guys I was working with, but investing less time at the beer joint and more time at church would probably be a good thing. And I got that from Robert. And then Robert asked me he tricked me one night when I had to come down to Houston to do some work. We were co-presenting to the executive committee at Cisco. And he cornered me at the Capitol Grill and gave me this great proposal to move to Houston to go work for Arthur Anderson. And I ended up accepting that. And that's, I moved to Houston to work for Robert at Arthur Anderson to head up their supply chain practice in oil and gas. And a lot of it, the main reason for that move is because I wanted guys like Robert to be in my life. And then when I moved here, that kind of picks up my story with CLPC. I had really dedicated my life to Christ up in Dallas again, and was real involved in a new church development to the point I went from not being too involved in church to really working my ass off at church. Being part of a new church development, that's like a startup of a job. I was literally spending 60 hours in that and another 50 hours in my work environment. So that was a lot of work. But we chartered that church in Frisco. We went from 3 of us with a preacher to 200 members in 2 years. And then we moved to Houston. And that's why I met Craig Goodwin and told Craig we just wanted to hide out. We didn't really want to get involved in anything. We were looking for a church where we could just has a sanctuary because we've been setting up chairs and cafeterias for 2 years. And of course, we had one service in the sanctuary and then the mold hit. That's another story. But that's when he introduced us to Jimmy and his class in a small group on Saturday night. And that's where I got to know not only Jimmy, but Doug Calderera and Mike Gerald, Tom Jones. And those guys quickly became part of my inner circle here in Clear Lake. With Jimmy quickly becoming my go-to guy. You know, at first, my relationship with Jimmy was really dependent on, I was so amazed at his knowledge of the Scripture and his ability to teach and his ability to learn and teach. And I was really leaning on Jimmy for my spiritual growth, and he really helped me on that. But, you know, as we became friends, we realized we have a lot more in common than we realized, and we just enjoyed each other's company. And I'm still kind of amazed about how you can spend so much time with the same people and never get tired of each other. You know, you worship together, you go to dinner every week, you worship every week, you ride bikes every week, talk a lot, and so it's a natural relationship. And our relationship's very special, and Jimmy's influence in my life and influence on my character can't. Just thank you. And it's certainly no coincidence that on February 18th, 2011, was the day I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. It was also the day Jimmy officially retired from ExxonMobil. And so I'm really grateful to Jimmy at that time, because he had big retirement plans, had bought an RV, had big trips planned, and he put it all on hold to help me get through those initial treatments. You know, and if Jimmy and I hadn't had the relationship we had, I seriously doubt he would have put a retirement plan on hold to come spend time babysitting me in the hospital. But he did, and so I'm forever grateful for that. And, you know, our relationship continues today. You know, when I had to get off the plane last week, I went, it's another story, but I was on vacation in Hawaii, got sick, had to go from the airport to the emergency room, and spent all last week getting a stent put into my bile ducts. You know, Jimmy was the guy that was there for me. Although I had a lot of guys that offered to be there for me, so I'm really grateful for them too. But then Nancy and I joined a small group, and you know, the Moros were part of that small group initially, still are today. And ML Morrow and I developed when you're in a small group, and Lee Swindler's in that group, and you know, you just naturally go through life together. And when you go through life together in a small group, you know, you just experience life together, and that naturally develops relationships. And, you know, I got to tell you, between Lee and ML, they're pretty quiet guys. I'm a mouthpiece, and they're not. But, you know, guys like ML, Lee, Ricky Arnold, Mark Christensen, Don Brown, you know, these guys are, as soon as they get, and they don't even know what's going on in my life sometimes, and they'll send me the right text at the right time. And I got 1,000 cases of it, where I'm having a bad night, or I'm having a bad day, or I'm in the hospital, and nobody even knows it. And they drop me a text or drop me an email with some scripture or a prayer or just a word of encouragement. And it's just always at the right time. And I think that's just the way God works. But even at work, at Arthur Anderson, you know, I met a couple of other guys. I met a guy named Bill Blizzard, who lives here in Clear Lake. And Bill and I developed a relationship because we have a lot of common interests. And Bill and I found ourselves not only working together, because we worked at the same place, but found ourselves going to dinner, spending a lot of time in boats together, a lot of common interest. And you know, we've always made it a point to meet up for lunch or breakfast. And through the course of that relationship, we've had a lot of the deep relationships about our faith, you know, about our relationships. And, you know, Bill's just one of those guys that I rely on in life. who's always there. Gary Galley was another one. Gary was another devout Catholic, had 5 girls, lived here in Clear Lake in a 3-bedroom house. You know, I learned a lot from Gary. And Gary and I commuted to work together, and he was pretty instrumental in. He loved to debate between Catholics and Protestants, but you know, it was a healthy debate. And I really appreciated Gary. And you know, if I wasn't at church or wasn't at work, I was at volleyball. And you know, the volleyball commitment was huge. And some people think we're completely nuts for investing so much time and money in our daughters' activities like that. But it was really more than just volleyball. I mean, because you end up spending time with other families. And in the course of that time, you experience life from a different perspective with those families. You know, and Steve Kelly's here from Friendswood. And so, you know, Steve and I, our daughters played volleyball together 9 years ago, or 10 years, I don't know, a long time ago. And, you know, and Steve and I, and Don Frieda and Randy Ellis, we were forced to, it's like almost like doing prison time, right? You're forced to spend time together. But it was during that time that we developed a pretty close relationship, and certainly have our discussions on a regular basis about faith, about God, the way that God works in our lives, and the importance of prayer and support. And, you know, there's been many, many nights in the hospital and many nights in my home when, you know, the Kellys were there. Steve was there. And, you know, I'm really, really grateful for that relationship. And it continues to be an important part of my life. But also, when we first moved here, Sarah was in the first grade, and we got involved in the Indian Princess program. That's the father-daughter camping program that many of you guys participated in. And that was when I met Mike Obert. Mike's here tonight. And even after our kids aged out of that program, Mike and I, you know, we haven't stopped our relationship. We still try to meet on a regular basis for lunch or breakfast or dinner or something. And I can't tell you how many long, deep conversations Mike and I have had, whether it's about work or marriages or kids or faith. And, you know, when Mike's gone through some challenges, I've been there, and I've had my many challenges. He's been there. And I'm just grateful for Mike. And also through my daughter's relationships. You know, one of my daughter's best friends is Sarah Trouble. And naturally, that's where we met Tom Trouble. Tom's around it, yeah, Tom. And Tom and his family have been very, very close to us. We've ridden bikes together. We went swim 50 together, vacation together. You know, I was on vacation with Tom 3 years ago, right before I got diagnosed. I was on vacation with Tom 2 weeks ago in Hawaii. You know, and Tom and I certainly share all those characteristics of roles that McDonald played out. And I know Tom is always there for me, always has been, always will be, just like so many others. And then there's my cousin, Troy Richards. It's really more like a brother than a cousin. You know, him and I have a unique relationship that we've had throughout my life, and he's godfather to my son. And given Nancy and I's health status, that's a role we take pretty serious. And, you know, he's there. And so, like I said, the point is, and there's a lot of other people. You know, there's a lot of you guys. I could talk about Schwarman. I could talk about Rick. You know, I could talk about Lee some more. I could talk about Sandy. I could talk about a lot of guys in this room who have an impact on my life. But what's important to note is my relationship with my inner circle have come from all aspects of my life. Some have come through church, some have gone through work, some have gone through relationships with our families. And what they have in common is that, all play that role that McDonald laid out. And what's really important is what they all have in common is we share a love of Christ. And there's Ricky. Ricky's back there. He's in that group. And being aligned and helping me stay aligned with Christ is one of the common denominators. And so I need that group in my life. So just to kind of finish out, I think you guys, obviously everybody knows about what I'm going through right now. And not looking for sympathy here. I'm not a victim at all. But my life's been pretty interesting, to say the least. 2 months after moving here and joining Arthur Anderson, got raided by the Justice Department because of the Enron debacle. So I was right in the middle of all that mess. I was the only guy in the office that didn't get his PC confiscated by the Justice Department. We had Ross came as a big surprise in our mid-40s. And certainly with Nancy's cancer diagnosis in 2009, and then, with mine in 2011. We've had probably a little greater dependency on people than we ever anticipated we would have. And, just to talk a little bit more about Robert. So when Arthur Anderson and the Enron debacle happened, it was hard on a lot of people. Arthur Anderson was a good company with 88,000 people, and there's a few people that made some bad decisions, but all 88,000 people were suffering because of it. And we all ended up being acquired by KPMG Consulting. And Robert, his life was especially impacted because he was a fairly new partner. He just paid his $200,000 to join the partnership, which is basically a loan by Citibank that gets repaid over future earnings. But when your company collapses like that, they want payment immediately. So, and on top of that, when you get acquired, it's the upper management that typically gets consolidated, and that happened to Robert. So Robert found himself unemployed for the first time ever, and in a precarious situation financially, and he was really in a bit of need. And so, that was an opportunity that I knew where I could be there for Robert. And Robert lived off of Memorial over in that part of Houston. And so, although he was in a small group, he was really connected to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church didn't have a men's breakfast. They didn't have a men's group. So I connected Robert to the guys over at Memorial Presbyterian, and we had a really good men's group. And Robert started going to that, and it really helped him. It helped him expand his relationships, and helped him with his faith, helped him with encouragement, and to the point to where he realized that the Catholic Church needed something like that. And so he had his small group leader. He told me, he said, "Man, we got to start something like this for the men, for the Catholic men in Houston." And that he had spare time. He was looking for a job, so that became his obsession. And I remember he called me up. I'll never forget that morning. He called me up and goes, "Man," because I've been working the phones, because I can't tell you how many people I've called. We got coffee and donuts for 30 people. I hope 20 show up. And he had 275 guys show up. And if you fast forward to today the Catholic Church has a nationwide men's group called The Man Is You that has over 45,000 people a part of it. headed up by a guy named Steve Bowman. And Steve was based here in Houston, and he was Robert's small group leader. He quit his job and started full-time on that ministry. And I had no idea that would evolve into that, but it did because of Robert's abilities. And I continued to talk to Robert a lot. We met on a regular basis every week. He traveled throughout the world. He always made it a point to go into the big cathedrals of the world and light a candle for me. And he would always tell me when he did that. And I knew I had candles lit on my behalf with saints praying for me in all the great cathedrals of the world. And that really meant a lot to me. I talk a lot about Robert because 3 years ago, a year after my diagnosis, and where Robert was, we talked almost daily. Either through email or text or phone calls and prayer. But I was up in Dallas one morning visiting another close friend of mine who was in his final stages of his cancer battle. And I got the phone call that Robert had passed away suddenly from an aneurysm. Just out of the blue. Blood clot started in his leg and moved up, and he died in his sleep. And it was hard, it was hard losing, not to end on a downer, but Gary Galley was also killed in a car wreck with 4 of his daughters. And that happened in San Antonio. When I was in San Antonio, I was supposed to have dinner with Gary. And I saw it on the news. And when you lose people like that in your life, that's when you realize, too, just how important they were in your life. But as I mentioned, I'm really a blessed person because I got a lot of people in my life. And I've talked about a few of them this morning, but there's a lot more. But the key point is these relationships are so critical to me now, but they didn't come about, they came about naturally, but it took effort on everybody's part to invest in that relationship. And I think, just one more example. I didn't want to talk too much about my cancer stuff because that's a whole story in itself. But I can't tell you how many mornings, I've woken up in the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning, and Jimmy, and Doug, Caldera, and Steve, Don, Bill, somebody was sitting there. And I just can't tell you how much that means. Because I saw so many people in the hospital who didn't have anybody there. Because it's absolutely physically impossible for your spouse to be there 24/7. They physically can't keep that up. And to have, a group of guys that you can rely on that will be there at that time, and just cleaning up after you in ways you would never really want to even talk about. But, so when you I hope, I sincerely hope that nobody goes through a crisis like we're going through. When you have to face your mortality and realize that life is short and precious. But when you're in that point, having the relationships I have now, that's the reason I'm able to fight the battle I can fight. It's because of those relationships. And those relationships came about over time, and they came about because of some direct intentions. And I think when I reflect upon it, how they all started the same way. They all started with the simple question of, hey, we should meet up for lunch sometime. I can also go off on long stories about how many of that conversations I've had with guys and we never did. And I know there's been moments in my life when people have relied upon me and I wasn't there, simply because I was too busy. And so my main encouragement and point for you all is, next time somebody says, hey, we need to meet up for lunch or breakfast or coffee or something, do it. And keep it. And do it again. Because that's the way these relationships happen. Don't wait for a crisis to hit and realize that it takes relationships with men take an investment. I can't say this on camera, but not nearly the investment as women, but it still takes an investment. And I am really grateful for the men in my life. And that's all I have. So I won't take any questions, buddy. I can give you a real quick cancer update, because I certainly need your prayers there. I got a good update. The last 9 months, all my treatments have been focused around 3 tumors in my liver and 1 in my rib. And we've gone through a lot of different treatment plans specifically around those 4 tumors. I haven't had any full body chemo in probably 9 months. And we got word in November that the treatments on those specific livers worked. So that's the good news. The bad news is some other spots popped up. But they were pretty small and didn't really require immediate attention. So they told me I could take a break for 3 months. No treatments and enjoy the holidays. So that was really good news. For us, that's a big victory in itself. So, but over Christmas, I started experiencing a lot of pain. And right before I left Hawaii, I started not feeling well. And as Tom can testify, I didn't feel too well in Hawaii. And the next thing you know, I got pretty yellow. My eyes turned yellow. Jaundice set in, which I knew was an issue with the bile duct. So last week, I went directly from the airport to the emergency room. And I spent all last week at MD Anderson. I had a procedure done where they put a stent into my bile duct to open that up again because there's some new tumor activity in my liver that is blocking my bile duct. So I got some new tumors in my liver creating problems. I have some more cancer spots in my ribs. And I got some more cancer in my lymph nodes. So it's kind of on the move again. And but that's the way it is with my cancer battle. And it's I would love to have a miraculous cure, but it's probably not going to happen. We're just going to have to treat the spots that come up as they come up. And I'll be back next week and be at MD Anderson again for 2 or 3 days, getting a series of scans and tests and blood work. You have to wait at least a week for all the belly ribbon to clear out of my body before I can do any treatments anyway. And I'll probably end up starting on some new round of chemo. The last 2 chemo treatments haven't really worked as they hoped. So I'm kind of quickly running out of chemo options. So we need prayers that this chemo option will work. But my faith has never been stronger. No shortage of hope, no shortage of love, and I still think I'm the most blessed guy on the planet. Life in Brownwood's really nice. So that's it.
Thank you, Josh. Why do we think we can do it by ourselves? So Josh has told a powerful story of what it means to be connected in these authentic relationships. And that's part of why we gather here for 6 weeks, is to encourage each other to do that. But I will say, if you're having trouble or you've never been able to make those connections, I can help you. There's some papers on the tables there. If you'll give me your name and an email and a phone number, I'll give you a call and let's sit down and talk about it. And I'll see what I can do to help you connect into that kind of a relationship. To give you the encouragement to say, let's have lunch, to actually go and have lunch and do it again and again. I want to end with something out of the book that Josh is talking about, but it's not out of this book. It's out of another book. This is from Hebrews 12. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with resilience the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Could we gather around Josh and pray for him as we leave? Because all of you here are those clouds of witnesses for Josh Strasner. And we can be that for each other. So let's join with him. Father, we thank you for Josh, for the life that he leads, for the example that he sets. We thank you that he has the courage to run that race well and to set that example for so many of us. And we thank you that he says yes to those, let's have breakfast or let's grab a cup of coffee. And he keeps saying yes over and over again. Lord, we're also thankful that it's you that's getting glorified through this life that he's living. Would you give that to each of us? And so we pray now, Lord, that you will continue to be with Josh as you have demonstrated in the past, and that the healing power of your Spirit will course through his body, Lord. That healing power of your Spirit will attack those cancer cells. The healing power of your Spirit will be the one who gives wisdom to those doctors and nurses at MD Anderson. And that even the healing power of your Spirit will be infused within that chemo that he takes in the coming weeks. All to your glory. We thank you in the name of your Son, Jesus. And all God's men said, Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Go in peace.